Welcome to everyone. Today we're here for the Principals Cadre Network, and it's my pleasure to be here. My name's Denny Paul May, and I will be with you for the next hour and a half, as well as Dr. Dion Bates as part of the KVEC team. And we're so super blessed to have you guys here with us today. We're going to talk about accommodations for principals, what principals need to know in regards to our upcoming state test and how that is a little different for students that have disabilities. So our learning targets for today, we're going to have a brief discussion of the IDEA 504 and ESSA law and how that law or those laws, those set of laws mandate um, not only inclusion of special populations within um, state testing, but also that those students, when they have certain disabilities, they have certain performance levels, they're eligible to receive state accommodations. And so, a big part of what we're going to talk about is we're going to focus on state accommodations. We're going to talk about accommodations in general a little bit. We're kind of going to look at the difference between those and what it means for instruction. And then we'll look at accommodation types. And then we're going to look at what principals' responsibilities for verifying and monitoring, evaluating accommodations. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is um, Kentucky regulations and federal laws. And so we're going to start with the 1973 Act of Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act. Now, this was a law that came about. Some people refer to it as the vocational rehabilitation law, um, and it's really, when you think about it, we want you to think about accessibility. We want you to think about leveling the playing field for students and allowing them to tell us and show us what they know when provided certain accommodations and modifications. Um, so it's an accessibility law, and it really, you guys as principals know that the 504 law is very much alive today. And just think access. Just think if I take my glasses off, I have limited access to what the screen says and being able to see and effectively do what I need to do. If I put my glasses back on, then I have access to the information. And so certainly that's what we're talking about here when we think about Section 504 and the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. Then, as we move further, in 1975, Public Law 94-142 came about, and it said, we recognize that students have been left out, and we're going to move to an era where we're going to include them in school. And not only are we going to include them, we're going to give you some federal money to do it. And we're going to call this Public Law 94-142, we're going to call that as a mandate for making sure that students with differences are included and that they have an individual education program that is planned for them to allow them to, work on gaps in their achievement, work on gaps in their function, work on gaps in their behavior. And then a few years later, they really started focusing on transition. And then as you go on down, when we look at our own state laws, we have Kentucky administrative regulations, and at least this KAR 701 Chapter 1. That's where you will find a lot of our regulations that kind of dictate the procedures that we follow, and also as we develop our state procedures for special education, we also have local policies and procedures. But the Kentucky administrative regulations. I just want you to think procedure. I want you to think we're getting money to educate students with disabilities, and we need to think about making sure that we follow the procedures. And then the Every Student Succeeds Act. Well, that's a mouthful. Every Student Succeeds Act. I want you to think required testing here in this when we look through this lens today of accommodations for students on the state test. I want you to think. I I want you to think about the fact that the law says that unless you have a medical waiver, you're going to be tested if you attend public school in Kentucky. You're either going to be attested like every other student without a disability on the KSA, or you're going to have an alternate testing attempt. And so when we talk about alternate testing attempts, we're only talking about 1% of our population. And when we go above 1% of our population, we receive some scrutiny from both the feds and the state. And so that's quickly just a little bit of context as we provide some thoughts about, you know, where this law is mandated from, what drives the fact that students that have disabilities also are tested, and they're tested with accommodations. So it's your turn. What's the difference in your mind if you don't care? Or you can unmute, you can turn your camera on, you can talk to us. It's much better if we have a discussion today. That's how adults learn, or that's how we learn best, I think. And so if if you don't mind, just put in the chat what you think the difference between accommodation and modification is when it comes to testing students. What's the difference between accommodations and modifications? And even in a broader context, what does it mean in in the classroom? I'll give you just a minute or two. We'd love to see that someone unmute or that doesn't care to share what your thoughts are on the differences between these two types of changes that we make in regards to instruction, and then also if we're talking about state testing. I see Dr. Bates. Accommodations provide access to the curriculum. Yes, they do. And then accommodations are kind of slight changes, right, to for that access. So, so we're gonna move on. So here's a little slide I put together that in regards to the differences between these two. Okay, you had time there to think about that. Accommodations provide support to the student. They allow access for you to learn content, for you to demonstrate content in achievement and assessment. And, accommodations are individualized and they should not reduce what the student is learning. There should be no reduction in the expectation of the standards. There should be no reduction in the expectation of what is being learned. Students learn the same curriculum with accommodations. With modification, the curriculum is modified. And that's exactly what we're getting at here. Very much so. So there's a reduction in the amount of material. There's a reduction in the answer choices. There might be a change in the method for assessment. And so, as we talk through that, I want you to think about those things and the differences. Really, if you're modifying a student's program, you're probably going to have a large burden of proof. If you were to ever have to go to a due process hearing, or if you're ever involved in any kind of questioning from KDE about why that student's program had been modified, you would have a large burden of proof on the basis of need for that modification, because you are in fact reducing what they learn, and that's not the intent of the standards. That's not the intent of Kentucky summative assessment. And so when we do think about modification, we think about our 1% population. They do have an alternate curriculum. The curriculum is based on the same standards, but it's the big rocks. There's a reduction in the breadth and the depth of the standard when we do alternate assessment. So that's really kind of what we're thinking about when we modify. And accommodations are largely for students that are matriculating to receive a diploma. And so when we on this next slide, we consider, here's some questions to consider when we select accommodations. One of the big things we really got to think about is, are we appropriately providing accommodations? And so when we choose accommodations, we look at the student and we look at their learner attributes and their abilities. We look at the environment to see if the environment's conducive to them being able to demonstrate what they know, and then the task, what the learner must do in order to um, demonstrate or show what they have learned, and then and then the task itself, what helps the learner be successful. So I want you to think about those questions as we move through. So the learning targets, the types of accommodations. Um, so when we think about types of accommodations, there's really 3 or 4 different types of accommodation. You have presentation accommodations, is going to be the first one that we're going to talk about. And so when we talk about presentation accommodations, we're talking really about how the teacher is providing the information to the student. Okay. And so when students with disabilities are in our classes, we have to think holistically about hitting the edge of the room and hitting those differences. And sometimes students are going to need text to speech because they may have some difficulty in being able to, you know, properly receive the information. So we may need text to speech. We may need read alouds. We may need braille, large print. When you're thinking about students that have vision impairments, those kinds of things come in. Visual aids like graphic organizers, and I've got a little graphic organizer on the right there. And then simplified language or additional explanations. So presentation accommodations are going to be how we are going to slightly accommodate students that have learning differences in our classroom so that they can receive the material, and we make sure that the targets are clear and that they know exactly what's expected of them, and that we're using every tool we have on hand to make sure in the classroom that we are providing the information and that they're receiving the presentation. And so that's certainly one way of doing it. And then we have response accommodations. We got speech to text, where the student they may have a physical disability that would keep them from writing or even word processing. And I have an old typewriter that reminds me of, it's one of the very first word processors that was ever put out. I think it's the Brother brand there, and that brings back some memories for me because I can remember when that thing came out, and I can remember the typewriter that was not electric all those years ago. So I'm starting to get a little bit old here, and I forget things. So y'all just have to bear with me. But response accommodations are going to be those things on how students complete tasks. How do they complete tasks? And how they respond to the instruction. And so we want students, our research says that learning and teaching and learning is an interactive process, and it should be I do something, you do something. I say something, you say something. I write something, you write something. And so they should be able to automatically, with the accommodations, be able to give us back information without any hindrance. And that's what the purpose of these response accommodations are. And then as you move on, you got to think about extended time on tests and assignments, and then frequent breaks over testing or multiple days. Those are some things that we would consider when students complete tasks. Do they need extended time? And will breaks help? The whole idea is to level the playing field based on the laws that we have so that students can show us what they've learned and that we know that. And then there's some setting accommodations. This is where students complete work. Okay. Is it better? Are we able to better? Are they able to better demonstrate their learning in a small group or an individual testing situation? Alternative workspaces. Do we need a quiet room or a sensory friendly room, or do we need a carrel? Those types of things. So we got to think about all of those things when we talk about accommodation. Now we're going to move on into now. The one point I want to make is that you know you can accommodate students, any student, in the classroom. If you're scaffolding the student or you're trying to help them get it, as Anita Archer would say, if you're trying to help them get it, you can accommodate. Okay. They do not have to be a student with a disability to receive an accommodation or a scaffold. However, when you choose state allowed accommodations on the IEP, and you determine that when the student takes the Kentucky summative assessment, that they're going to have these accommodations. These are the types of accommodations that we're talking about here. So students with disabilities are entitled to these accommodations on the KSA and alternate assessment. And principals must ensure that accommodations during the testing are used during the testing match those provided in daily instruction. So we got to think about, uh, is this something we're doing? Now, I'm going to tell you a quick story. When I was director of special ed at Pikeville Independent, I noticed very quickly that our students were having some difficulty with the reading portion of the exam, and I think the big thing was that there was a clear difference in the accommodation in the classroom and the accommodation that they were receiving on the test, because what we were doing is we were given a human reader in the classroom, and then when we went to the state test, we were giving uh, an automated version of that reader. We were given a non-human reader, and we were putting students online, or we were giving them audio tapes, and it wasn't matching what they were getting consistently. So we need to be, as principals, we need to be thinking about, are we getting uh, uh, um, a one-to-one type situation in terms of we're providing this type of accommodation, and when we go to the testing situation, we're doing the very same thing. And I know all the logistical issues with that. I know there's times when it's just easier to go ahead and do the online, but the state is very clear about the consistency between what's going on in the classroom and what's daily for accommodations. So these state allowed accommodations include readers allowed for students with documented reading disabilities, and those readers also can be human or non-human. And then the scribes permitted if motor or written expression disabilities are verified. And then you have assistive technology, speech to text, software, calculators, communication devices, and extended time. And then you have your separate settings that we talked about already. So, those are certainly pieces that we can, um, include on the state allowed accommodations. And when we make those choices, we have some responsibilities. And so it's your turn. What's the difference here? Share in the chat examples for each type of accommodation. Think about a presentation accommodation and try to match what we just talked about. Think, if you need to, just think about each of the four types and see if you can come up with an example and place it in the chat for us right now. Cindy Johnson from Perry County says a presentation example would be large print materials. That's exactly right. And then, if as you go on through, what response, time, scheduling, setting. So as we circle back to response would be speech to text. Kevin Campbell says, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that very much. Fine principal out there in Perry County. And then what about a timing or a scheduling one? Of course, that one's pretty easy, but nonetheless, extended time is huge. And then also thinking about, sometimes students have behaviors, and they're going to need another type of setting. And so we may have to go to, an individual type situation. And I know that's very popular. Extended time, double time. Thank you, Miss Ritchie. I appreciate that very much. And Dr. Bates, time and scheduling will be extended time. And so, yeah, you guys are getting it. It's pretty straightforward so far, right? Okay, so now we get into talking about, as principals, we have some responsibilities, and we have responsibilities in monitoring, and we have responsibilities in verifying and evaluating, accommodations. And when we evaluate accommodations, we're really wanting to see, are they being effective? Do we need to change them slightly? Are they ineffective? Do we need to fade them away? Because the one caveat with accommodation for students is that if we accommodate them too much, or we give them too much support, sometimes we can further disable them, and they're going to graduate and they're going to be looking around for us. So we want to think about the responsibility of monitoring here in this next piece. And so when we ensure compliance, we oversee the implementation of accommodations and classroom assessments. And ensuring IEP and 504 plans teams regularly review accommodations for effectiveness. We provide professional development to teachers on state approved accommodations, and we verify that students receive only their approved accommodations during testing. And so, like I said, in instruction, you're doing a walkthrough as a principal, and you see that maybe a teacher's given a student that may not have a flight. Maybe they're giving them some type of graphic organizer to help them along, or they're scaffolding them some way. They're giving an example, a non-example, or maybe they're giving them a worked example of a math problem or whatever. And those are perfectly okay. It's just when we get to the state allowed and we start to choose things for students on the state test that we have to really, really ramp our game up as far as verifying and ensuring that these students are appropriately getting what they're supposed to be getting. And, the second part of this is collaborating with teachers and families. We need to facilitate ARC meetings to discuss accommodations. We need to make sure that we're not just going through it. Now, there used to be an old accommodations modifications form that some districts required. And I think it's a very useful document. It's a document that helps you with that discussion. And certainly in the ARC meeting, when students are receiving accommodations on the state test, there should be some transparency there with parents, and we should be making sure that we are all on the same page as to what students are receiving and what students are not receiving. Because as an administrator, you're going to hear about it if they're not receiving what they're supposed to be receiving, or that type of thing. So it's always in particular with those 504 plans, sometimes those are not electronic. In the old days when I was a director and I was over 504 as well in the district, we would always run into that problem where we had to overdo it and make sure that we were doing the right thing and that everybody was on the same page. So I think it's super, super important as principal to make sure that our folks are communicating with families, and that when we're in the ARC meeting, that we're not just glossing over accommodations, but we're in fact having discussions that they're appropriate, they're being faded. We need more time with them. We need to look at some different ones. Those kinds of things are very, very useful, and they have their place. Sometimes when I train specially designed instruction, which is what students get when they have an IEP that's different from all the other instruction under SLL, including universal design for learning, differentiation, and tiered activities, I tend to think that sometimes that maybe we're overdoing it a little bit, or maybe we need to rethink it, or maybe we need to have a plan to fade it away. And we really, when I'm talking about, accommodations, I'm not downing accommodations. Accommodations have their place. It's just that when students are in high school, especially in the co-taught settings, we don't need just to accommodate. We need to also do specially designed instruction, and that's a problem that we have, and we know that. And so when because there's so much content that heavy in those classes that they have to receive, but we still have to provide the accommodation, and we also have to provide direct instruction, explicit instruction, or whatever type of instruction is needed for that individual that is special and different from universal design for learning, differentiation, and tiered activities. And so collaborating and making sure that we're all on the same page and address any concerns from parents and staff regarding accommodation implementation is super, super important. Now, conducting observations, collecting documentation. To prevent overuse or misuse of accommodations, principals should observe classrooms to ensure that students use accommodations in their daily routine. We should be looking for a notation in lesson plans. We should be talking and working with our co-teaching teams to make sure that we all know what we all know, and that's what's on the IEP is verified, and it's straightforward, and it's needed, and that we're actually doing it with fidelity consistently. Now, the law used to say daily, or the guidance used to say daily, and they thought more deeply about that. And it's hard to do anything daily these days, and with all the things, the logistics that we have within schools. So we backed away from that just a little bit and said it has to be consistently what they're receiving in terms of accommodation. And so when we observe classrooms, we ensure that students are using the accommodations in their daily learning. We require teachers to document when and how accommodations are used in the class, and we monitor practice testing sessions to confirm accommodations are provided appropriately before we actually get to the assessment. And the key question here to ask is is there documented evidence that the student regularly uses this accommodation in his instruction? And, that a good place to document that's in the conference summary minutes and a discussion of that. And so certainly when we are doing our walkthroughs, when we're doing all of our monitoring of instruction, we should be thinking about this component, this small component of what IEP students are in the class, what 504 students are in the class, and are the accommodations being provided with fidelity and with the same type of routine that is needed to say they're getting it, routinely, and they're going to need it on the state test in just the same way. So another responsibility of principals is that, having your staff trained. Teachers and test administrators must know which accommodations are allowed on state test, how to provide accommodations correctly. And we do have some things linked in here that talks about, the inclusion document is linked, and it goes in deeply into what, what's allowed, what's not allowed on the state test. And so that's certainly something that everyone needs to know when you work with students with disabilities, and when accommodations should be denied if they are not in the IEP or have not been used during instruction. We need to make sure that we're monitoring that. We don't need to be given accommodations when they're unwarranted. So the key question here to ask is, have teachers and test administrators received training on appropriate testing accommodations? Just making sure that they've received that testing accommodation training is super, super important. And there's a little additional training with alternate assessment that goes on that is provided by HDI from the University of Kentucky, and principals and ARC chairpersons and special education teachers, and they are all having to have, rounds of training in regards to alternate assessment. So you need to be aware of that. How principals can verify that accommodations are warranted on state tests for students with IEPs. That's a big question. Whose responsibility is to verify that? And it really largely goes back to that ARC chairperson, that we're able to verify, and we're able to know where to look, and we're able to look and see if students are actually getting what they're supposed to be getting, and it's verifiable based on their disability, one, and two, based on their performance. So we can't just say blanketly that just because a student has MMD, they get all accommodations across the board. Although they probably do, we still have to verify it, and it still has to be documented. And so that's what we're talking about here. Ensuring alignment between IEP and state testing. Accommodations must be provided during state testing, and they must match those used in daily instruction. Principals should review the student's IEP and confirm that the accommodations listed are also provided in classroom instruction and assessments. A way to do that is to have documentation in the lesson plan that accommodations are being provided, why they're being provided, how they're being provided. Ensure teachers are implementing the accommodations consistently across subjects. Verify that accommodations are not first introduced during testing. They must be a routine part of the student's education. And the key question here then is, are the accommodations used regularly in classroom instruction assessment, not just for state testing? And when we review ARC decisions, this is huge too. The IEP team or the ARC team determines which accommodations are appropriate. Principals should confirm that ARC discussions have justified the need for each accommodation, and that we've properly identified the places where it goes in the IEP to in fact document that these accommodations are needed because this is where the student is currently performing, and the student is consistently and significantly below the same age peer, or the student has a need like extended time based on their 504 plan. So we really need to think about that. So checking, ensure that accommodations are not solely given to boost test scores. Now, this is a serious problem, and this is one that we've seen on display here recently in terms of manipulating eligibility or providing eligibility that's not warranted. So we really have to be able to verify the eligibility. We have to verify the need for specially designed instruction, and if there's an adverse effect, verify the 504 plan that there's an accessibility issue, and make sure that the accommodations match what the student actually needs and not just giving them that to raise test scores. Key question here is did the ARC document why each accommodation is necessary based on the student's disability and the data from their performance. So that's super, super important as we move through. And then verifying that accommodations meet state guidelines. Principals should compare accommodations in the IEP to Kentucky's state-approved accommodation list. And that's, in the inclusion document and some of the training that you receive separately from this training. Ensure that accommodations like read aloud, scribing, and extended time are only provided to students with disabilities that require them. Now, disabilities that require them, and also that we have data and performance data that show that they don't just meet the criteria of the disability, but they need specially designed instruction, and they have an adverse effect that requires specially designed instruction. Confirm that accommodations do not alter the test validity. Reading assistance is not allowed for reading comprehension tests unless permitted for disability-related needs. And so, you just really need to think about how important it is that we verify these things. And does this accommodation comply with Kentucky's state testing policy, which is the key question. So here's the guidance that I talked about a little bit from KDE. This guidance says, number one, the accommodation must be used regularly during instruction and classroom assessments. It should be part of the daily learning environment and not just introduced for state testing. We have to verify that the accommodation is documented in the teacher lesson plan, student work samples, and classroom assessments. The accommodation must be necessary due to the student's disability, and this should be reported by the student's present level performance and disability related challenges. And this is a little bit dated because they use the word PLEP there, or the acronym PLEP. But we really talk about just present levels. What are their present levels of performance? Where are they currently functioning? And can we show a need for accommodations based on that documented progress monitoring, teacher input, and previous assessments? So that the accommodation directly supports the student's identified needs. We have to raise a need. We have to verify, if there's test data that shows that they have the need. We have to verify that need, and we have to show that we're providing goals around that need. And then, we're placing it in certain places in the IEP. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. The accommodation must be allowable per Kentucky state testing regulations. And, you need to outline and look at the inclusion of special populations document, which I've linked to this the end of this presentation, and then check that the KD accommodations modifications manual to verify that the accommodation is permitted on the specific state test. Now, so how KDE guides this: the accommodation must be used regularly during instruction, and again, it should be a part of those environments. I wanted to hit this one more time. The accommodation must be necessary due to the student's disability. It's documented in the present level. And we have documents to review to make sure that we're matching them appropriately, including the inclusion of special populations and KD's accommodations and modifications manual. So super, super important that we have that information in with you. So it's your turn. In the chat, what are your big takeaways from principal responsibilities? When we do these trainings, we realize that you guys come to us from different levels of experience, and you have different experiences with, maybe administrating and supervising these types of situations. So we're hoping today that we confirm some things that you're doing, and we remind you of some things maybe that you needed to be reminded of, and that we inspire you to go on and look in those documents that we've provided as resources, that you would learn on your own more and more about the appropriateness of these accommodations and what is needed. So just take a minute and share in the chat, what are your big takeaways for principal responsibilities here? What did you learn? What was an aha? What did these things or what did we learn from these things, I guess, is the best way to say that.
Mr. May, it looks like Ms. Ritchie put in here the verify students' need for accommodations.
Yes, that is perfect. And the verifying the accommodation, it requires us to read the present level. It requires us to look at special factors. It requires us to look at goals to see that goals match the accommodation that we're asking for, and that we have that listed appropriately. in supplementary aids and services, and that we've marked the box correctly. And so, there's lots of things there to think about in terms of, um, the information that we need to be so clear on. I'm gonna give you just a minute or two to reflect. We're flying here, so we've got time, and so I would like to see, possibly some more.
There's a few more in the chat, Mr.
Okay, I
May.
see it.
Mr.
I see it
Campbell
now.
said,
Yeah.
yep,
So I see
okay.
Kevin Campbell remind us that we are responsible for ensuring the correct accommodations for students. And yes, that's one of the intentions of today. And then Dr. Bates says confirm that there is data to support why an accommodation is needed and not a practice of and not a practice of selecting all accommodations. And during observations to confirm accommodations is being used, and then making sure accommodations in the classroom are uh, as the same on all assessments. Yes. So those are all wonderful comments. I appreciate it very much. And so certainly those are all good examples of what we were hoping that you were going to take away from this. And hopefully we've also provided you with some further curiosity about what's included in the conclusions for special population. It's always a good idea to read through that inclusion of special populations document on your own and kind of think about it and kind of formulate questions. And this is one of the things I've noticed over the years, and I've been involved for a while. You can tell by looking at the screen that we've been involved for a while. But you know, the testing situation always makes me nervous because it changes from year to year. And so you have also that responsibility to, just to make sure that, you're clear on what a reader really is and how it's been included. You're clear on, a calculator and the use of a calculator. It's always so super uh, intense, I think, in terms of the changes. And so we need to be, as principals, we need to be fully aware of what those changes are from year to year. And so really, really being keyed in on that is super important as well. But this is just a screen grab from an IEP, and this is what it looks like. And one of the areas, and I'm going to highlight one of the areas that we've been seeing citations in. And as you know, we work a lot in due process, but we also are firm believers in doing good instruction. And so, I just want to show you a visual here of what an IEP looks like. And I know you've all seen this, and it's changed over the years, but really the one that's given people a little bit of problem right now is the use of the handheld calculator or the calculator use in its entirety. And the way I understand it is it's that you know, some uh, some parts of the KSA, uh, all students get a calculator, okay? But then we have some portions of the test where you can't use a calculator um, unless you have an IP. And that's the purpose of this box right here. And so when we have an IP or a 504 plan, we can check the use of a handheld calculator uh, on those non-calculator portions of the exam, if you will. And I think you all understand that. Um, but we check it here, and when we do, then that keys the State Department into looking for verification, which we've been talking a lot about today. Okay, and so I'm going to show you on the next slide. This is a little bit of a screen grab from the record review document that I use and Brenda uses and Dion uses to review files. And so right here under special factors, um, we see that we've elected over here on the far right hand portion of the page on the bottom, that circle down there at the bottom, that we have elected to provide or not an online calculator but a handheld calculator in this instance. And then it says here the ARC completed the consideration of special factors for all of the following areas. And we certainly have some problems with behavior, but we're going to focus on assistive technology needs today because that's the one that needs to be checked if we check the box. And so when we check that box, we check assistive technology needs. And then we go into um, another area on the IEP, just below that on the special factors. This is the special factors piece, and we say, yes, assistive technology devices are necessary. And then down here under the software that's needed, we go in, you can see they've got this student's getting text to speech software, but he's also getting a calculator. So that needs to be documented there. And then it goes a little deeper. Okay. It goes a little deeper. So on this next one, uh, factors listed must be consistent with present levels. Okay. That's the big takeaway. So we need to see that the student needs a calculator. And in this instance, in this example, this student Donald, he's a student with a mild mental disability. He also has a severe cognitive memory, working memory deficit. And so when you have working memory deficits, then you're gonna have a hard time remembering basic math facts. Therefore, you have a verified need for having a calculator. And so then you would say, okay, down here, the conceptual understanding moved toward using semi-concrete representation to explain his answers. Donald and his use of calculator regularly to access grade level standards in order to focus on grade level skills without struggling with his basic computation skills. So what we're trying to do here is we're giving him that tool and we're giving him instruction, especially design instruction, and that would be instruction in the use of the calculator, maybe to support that goal. And then he's got a calculation, maybe he's got a math goal. And then we've selected assistive technology under the special factors piece. So we've done that. Now we've backed up and looked at present level, and we see that he has a verified need. Anybody have any questions about that? Because that's a lot of information, I know, but it's pretty straightforward. Factors listed, special factors listed must be consistent with present levels. So if we choose the state accommodation in the state allowed box, then we have to make some internal consistency with the IEP come to light. We need to raise the need and provide some data. Now, one of the other things that I would charge you to think about would be, hey, maybe we probed the student with a calculator and without a calculator, and we included that in his performance data in the present level. We showed how well he does with a calculator as opposed to maybe not doing as well. So I think that's something else that we can look for as we verify that information in that present level. And then the next screen grab, or a series of screen grabs, this is a busy slide, I know, but I wanted to show you all four places that it's required. Okay. So we've, over here in number 3, we've chosen on the IEP that the student's going to get a calculator. And then we've also marked it in special factors and we've documented it with the word calculator and we've checked the box. Now, just this morning, I received some correspondence from KDE that said, hey, we've been reviewing some files and we noticed that there's 2 that did not mark yes. So if you just forget to mark yes, you can do a non-programmatic change and fix that up with an ARC signature and the teacher signature, and say it was an oversight, and you can send that to the parent. And that's what needs to happen with that. But if you've left out the verification in the present level, then you need to have an ARC meeting to do that, right? And so this is really what we're talking about when we talk about we've chosen that calculator, we're verifying there's a need, and we're making sure that that's being consistently provided with specially designed instruction daily for that student in order for them to qualify. And then we also have to put it in the supplementary aids and services up here under number 2 on the screen. And so you see all the 4 places. You've got it in special factors, you've got it in the state allowed box, you've got it in the supplementary aids and services, and we've verified the need in the present level. And that's the requirement of the state. That's what the state requires. So as an ARC chairperson and as a principal, you're verifying lots of things here. You're verifying that we have documentation and data to support that student has a need for that calculator on the state exam because it's something extra. It's more than what the general population gets, and we have to verify the need for it. And that's what the state requires. And they are citing districts left and right for not doing that. The same kind of thinking as we circle back here just a second on this when we look at these required components in the middle here, part of the screen, in terms of special factors, sometimes we'll have a student that has OHI and we forget to require, a special factor is behavior and what we're going to do there. And we need verification that he has behavior needs. We need to also then say, with that behavior, we have to come up with positive behavioral intervention supports that need to go in there. They're peer reviewed. And we need to document that and then document it in those other places as well. Now, certainly, it might be if it's maladaptive behavior, You might also would mark the box that there's reinforcement and behavior modification strategies that need to be implemented. And so, being aware of that is part of your job as a principal, and making sure that we know where to verify that is. I think it's very key for us as we get that information out, because um, it's something that we've trained in the past, but it's something that's being, for whatever reasons, being left out, being, kind of glossed over in our ARC meetings and our documentations on our IEPs. So it's your turn. What's the difference? Uh, Here we're going to share in the chat 4 places of documenting accommodations in the IEP. So what are the 4 places? Do you care to think about that for a second? Place that in the chat for us. You see that chat light up with those 4 places where it needs to be documented. We've chosen that the student's getting it. They're getting it on the test. So where does that go? And how do we document that on the IEP? Starting to see Dr. Bates says present level, state accommodations. Ms. Ritchie said it's present levels and meeting forms. Exactly right. But as we think about it, one of the things that we talk a lot about with students that have these types of issues that would need a calculator because they have deficient cognitive working memory, and we see that in terms of um, when we get the WISC score and we look at the IQ and we dive into that piece. But really, what we're talking about is that students need to practice recalling information, and they need daily practice on that. So, as principals, when you could do your walkthroughs, make sure you remind your teachers how important it is that you're having students with some productive struggle. You're pushing them into the zone of proximal development that Leo Vatsky talked about. And we're really pushing them to recall information from a blank slate. Okay. So we talked about 4 things yesterday. Can you remember what those 4 things are without your notes? And so we think that's so super, super important. And especially it's super important for our students that have disabilities. And so let's move on here. Um, so the 4 places were present level, and then also in supplementary aids and services, and then on the state allowed box, and then we're also documenting in special factors. So super important that we get it in all 4 places. And it's kind of prompted by, we look at the IEP kind of backwards. Did you choose the state allowed accommodation? And then do you have the verified information? And then did you include it in special factors? And did you document it appropriately? And then did you put it in supplementary aids and services? Now, sometimes people get specially designed instruction and SAS mixed up. And so I think it's very important for us to understand that supplementary aids and services are what the student needs to make progress. What the student needs. Specially designed instruction is what the teacher does different in adapting content, methodology, and delivery of instruction. And it's super, super important that we know the difference between those as principals, because we need to guide our special ed teachers. I know we have brand new special ed teachers in lots of places, and we have lots of special ed teachers that have less than 5 years of experience. And so when we think about those things, we need to think deeply about, hey, do they understand the terminology? Do they understand the vocabulary? And one of the things that our students with special needs have problems with is making sure that they know the terminology. Terminology is a big issue for students, so we need vocabulary development, but we also need our staffs to be developed with vocabulary. We need them to understand all the parts of the IEP. We need to know the difference between all those acronyms. We need to make sure that when we say SDI, we know what we're talking about. And SAS, what are we talking about? Or OVR, or all those acronyms. And so it's really, really super important that we are all on the same page. We know what to verify. We're looking at general education teachers and say, hey, you're responsible for these accommodations as well. And that's something I haven't talked a lot about, but I'm gonna tell you now. On 504s, the teacher, the general education teacher, is responsible for the accommodation. And there's a court case in West Virginia where a teacher refused to provide accommodations. And guess what? He got cited and he got fined for not uh, allowing that student to have the accommodations, and he had to pay out of his own pocket money. And so, I'm not trying to scare you up or anything, but there is a court case. There's precedence for general education teachers have to provide accommodations for 504 students. It's not the responsibility of the IEP teacher or the special education teacher. Um, there's a shared responsibility in that classroom between the two in co-taught classrooms, and it's certainly super important that we understand and we delineate those responsibilities. And so your general education teachers need to know the terminology. They need to know what's allowed and what's not allowed and how to provide the accommodations for 504 students. And your special education teachers need to know the same. So we have some more in the chat here. Special factors, supplementary aids and services, present levels, accommodation plan, and special factors. Thank you for that, Dr. Bates. Dr. Bates put number 1, supplementary aids and services, number 2, present levels, number 3, accommodation plan, and number 4, special factors. So certainly it is super, 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 super important for us to understand that.
So is that the 4 areas? I just wanted
Yes,
to
that was
clarify
the
that,
4
Mr. May.
areas
That's the
that
4
you,
areas. I was going to just make sure. Okay, make sure that everyone had that.
yeah, and I'm back on the screen here, with the numbers. You see the numbers, with the little arrows.
Yes.
You
Okay.
see present levels is number 1, and then you see supplementary aids and services number 2, and then you see in number 3 the state allowed box for accommodations, um, and that's where you're choosing that calculator. And the state's saying, "Hey, we got to verify that in the special factors." And so right there's the number 4. It's special factors. So present level. Um, Supplementary aids and services, state allowed box, uh, and then the present special factors are the key pieces there. The last thing we're going to have you do is just reflect and journal. I want you to just to take a minute, and I want you to just kind of think about all the things that we talked about. We talked about law. We talked about the types of accommodations that are available and their slight differences. We talked about the differences between accommodations and modifications, and we talked about verifying and evaluating, and the fact that there needed to be some fading of accommodations. So take just a second and think about those things, and just write 2 or 3 thoughts down as we get ready to end up here today. I wanted just to take a minute here and let you share, and I'm starting to see some
There's some.
things.
Yeah, I was going to say there's some
Yeah.
in the chat, and there's
Cindy
one from Miss
Johnson.
Ritchie,
Yes.
and,
Thank you.
and you may
Thank you,
not see
Dr.
the one
Bates.
from Miss Ritchie, but it says she talks that she appreciated the reminders that what they're required and the requirements for the regular ed special ed. So she just appreciated the
Yes.
what to look for in the requirements. And then I see Mr. Campbell and Miss Johnson also. So I'll let you take a.
Yeah, Kevin Campbell says the significance of monitoring accommodations. I think it's super important. I know that Office of Education Accountability and Office of Testing Accountability, they're always out there and they're always looking, and there's an allegation here and there. So we want to be mindful of those things when it comes to providing the appropriate things. But it's more than that. It's more than compliance. It's making sure that students are getting what they need when they need it. And it's also making sure that we're not overdoing it. We're getting it just right for students. I liken it to baby bear's porridge. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's just right. And we've got to verify that. And we've got to make sure that when we look in these classrooms, that students are getting what they need in order to learn. And so super happy to see those comments. A reminder to verify accommodations that are being implemented. Super, super important that we verify and that we evaluate and that we fade when needed. And so, I just put a few things in here. There's a bookmark here for KDE testing guidance. I like that document. It's the do's and don'ts. It's the do's and don'ts of testing. It's a couple of pages. It's a real quick read. And then we have KDE's assessment page. We have the alternate assessment page. And then we also have the inclusion of special populations. And then we linked, our staff that's here today. We put their contacts in there. So certainly you can reach out to any of us if you have questions later. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it so much. We appreciate the support of the colleagues, Dr. Bates and Doug Smith, for being here today to help out with this very important topic. The one thing I would leave you with is this. we really got to roll our sleeves up and we really got to get back to teaching kids at every level if we're going to make a difference and we're going to change test scores. We've got to stop focusing on the content and start teaching kids. And the residual effect of that is going to be that the test scores are going to rise in spite of the test scores. If we do the instruction, if we love the kids, if we really invest and we provide the accommodations with fidelity and we fade them when we need to and we verify that they're needed and we do all those things with fidelity, getting back to that type of situation where we're actually teaching kids is really what's going to make the difference. We got to take our eyes off the scoreboard during March Madness. It's hard to do, isn't it? So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Danny. And thanks everybody that was here.